In 1974, the World Cup was almost broke. The organization running it was so short on cash that some officials were paying expenses out of their own pockets. 20 years later, that same tournament was worth over $4 billion. One man did that, and he didn't even like soccer that much. This is what it became. Packed stadiums, billion-dollar broadcast deals, sponsors lining up to pay just to put their logo near a soccer ball. But to understand how we got here, you have to go back to a man nobody talks about anymore, and the broke, struggling organization he took over.
Picture FIFA in the 1960s, not the global money machine you know today. Back then, it was basically a tiny office in Switzerland with a few old men in suits, some filing cabinets, and barely enough money to run a single tournament properly.
The World Cup existed, sure, but it was treated like a sports event, not a business. Television rights were sold for almost nothing. Sponsors barely existed. The idea that companies would pay millions just to be associated with a soccer tournament, nobody had really tried it. Then, in 1974, a Brazilian lawyer and businessman named João Havelange decided he wanted to run FIFA, and he didn't want the job to be ceremonial. He wanted to turn it into an empire. To win the FIFA presidency, Havelange traveled to over 80 countries. He shook hands, made promises, and told smaller soccer nations something nobody had told them before. I will get you money, and I will get you respect. It worked! In 1974, Havelange became the first non-European president of FIFA. And he had one core belief. The World Cup wasn't just a tournament, it was a product. And products need to be sold. But here's the strange part. Havelange wasn't the one who actually figured out how to make the money. He needed someone else. Someone almost nobody outside the sports world has ever heard of. His name was Horst Dassler. He ran a sportswear company you've definitely heard of, Adidas. And Dassler understood something Havelange didn't. Sports wasn't just about competition. It was about exposure. And exposure could be sold to the highest bidder. The real problem with sports back then was nobody had built a proper bridge between companies and tournaments. Companies wanted to advertise, tournaments needed money, but there was no clean, legal, organized way to connect the two. Dassler decided to build that bridge himself. In 1982, Dassler co-founded a company called International Sport and Leisure, ISL for short. Its entire purpose was simple: package up the rights to global sports events and sell them to companies as advertising opportunities. ISL went to the biggest companies on Earth and made them an offer nobody had made before. Pay one company, get exclusive rights to be the only soft drink, the only camera brand, the only car brand associated with the entire World Cup. No competitors allowed in your category. This idea sounds obvious now, but in the early 1980s, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, a single sponsorship deal could be worth tens of millions of dollars. And suddenly, FIFA had a reason to think bigger. But this created a much bigger issue. If sponsorships could be worth that much, then television rights, the ability to broadcast the games to billions of people, had to be worth even more, and nobody had any idea how to actually price that. In the early days, TV networks paid almost nothing for World Cup rights because nobody believed a soccer tournament could pull in massive global audiences the way the Olympics did. Dassler and Havelange had to prove them wrong. The 1978 World Cup in Argentina became an early test. The tournament was controversial, held under a military dictatorship, with accusations of match fixing in the air. But television cameras were rolling, and for the first time, the world was watching closely. Nobody saw what happened next. The tournament drew enormous global attention, and Havelange realized something important. Controversy didn't shrink the audience, it grew it. People couldn't look away. With that proof in hand, Havelange and Dassler built a real strategy. Expand the tournament, add more countries, add more games. Every extra game was another chance to sell another ad slot, another broadcast package, another sponsorship. In 1982, the World Cup expanded from 16 teams to 24. More countries meant more local fans. More local fans meant more countries demanding broadcast rights. More broadcasts meant more advertising slots to sell. But here's the catch nobody talks about. Adding more teams wasn't really about fairness or giving smaller nations a chance. It was a business decision disguised as a sporting one. Every new country was a new television market to sell. And this strategy had another benefit. Smaller countries that got more chances to qualify were also smaller countries with votes inside FIFA. Havelange needed those votes to stay in power. Expanding the tournament wasn't just profitable, it was political insurance. This created a much bigger issue, though. The more money flowing through FIFA, the more people wanted a piece of it. And where there's a giant pile of unregulated cash with very few people watching how it moves, You can probably guess what happens next.
By the 1980s, Coca-Cola wasn't just sponsoring the World Cup, it was funding FIFA's youth programs, funding global development projects, basically becoming an unofficial financial partner of FIFA itself. The line between sponsor and shareholder started to blur. By the early 1990s, the machine was complete. Broadcast rights worth hundreds of millions, sponsorship deals worth hundreds of millions more. A tournament that once struggled to pay its own staff was now one of the most profitable events on the planet. But while everyone was busy celebrating how rich the World Cup had become, almost nobody was asking the obvious question: who was actually checking where all this money was going? Investigators later found that ISL, the very company Dassler built to professionalize sports sponsorship, had been secretly paying bribes to FIFA officials for years to keep winning marketing contracts. Millions of dollars moved through hidden accounts. In 2001, ISL collapsed into bankruptcy. The company that helped invent modern sports marketing owed creditors hundreds of millions of dollars, and buried in the wreckage were secret payments that would take years to fully expose.
It took over a decade of investigations, leaked documents, and court cases in Switzerland to fully uncover what happened. Names started surfacing. Officials who would approve sponsorship deals were found to have received secret personal payments. João Havelange, the man who first turned the World Cup into a business, was eventually named in these investigations himself. In 2013, he resigned from his honorary FIFA position rather than face an ethics ruling. The empire he built had outgrown his control.
But here's the part that surprises most people. Even after all of this, the bribery, the bankruptcy, the scandal, the system Dassler and Havelange built didn't collapse. It got bigger, because by then, the World Cup had become too valuable to fail. Today, the World Cup generates over $6 billion per tournament cycle. Broadcast deals alone are worth billions. And nearly every part of that model, exclusive sponsorship categories, expanded tournaments, global broadcast packaging, traces directly back to the playbook Dassler invented in a small office in the early 1980s. And the man who inherited this machine, Sepp Blatter, ran FIFA for almost 2 decades using the same playbook, until 2015, when FIFA officials were arrested in dawn raids at a hotel in Switzerland, accused of decades of bribery and corruption tied to this very system. Here's the uncomfortable truth most fans never think about. The reason the World Cup feels so massive, so glamorous, so impossible to ignore is the exact same reason it became one of the most corruption-prone organizations in modern sports. Both came from the same decision: turn passion into profit. This matters because it's not just a story about soccer. It's the blueprint for how almost every major sporting event on Earth makes money today. The Olympics, the Super Bowl, even your favorite local league. Somebody, somewhere, had to be first. And that somebody happened to be a quiet shoe executive nobody expected. Here's the twist that makes this story stick with people. Horst Dassler, the man who built the entire financial engine behind modern sports, died in 1987, just 5 years after creating it. He never saw the World Cup become the multi-billion-dollar empire he engineered. He built the machine and never got to watch it run. So next time you watch the World Cup final, the fireworks, the sponsor logos flashing on every screen, the broadcast deal worth more money than some countries' entire economies, remember, none of that happened by accident. It was designed, built piece by people chasing something far bigger than a trophy. The real game was never just on the field.